Russia in the 1990s was one of the darkest periods in the nation's history. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, chaos and uncertainty gripped the nation, leaving profound impacts on the lives of millions. But the real shock came when what was happening in the depths of the economy finally surfaced. Billions of dollars. Yes, billions of dollars, as if they had never existed at all, had simply vanished from the Kremlin's treasury. This money, resources that should have been used to build Russia's future, had suddenly disappeared. And no one, not a single official body, could explain how it happened. If you're feeling curious right now, stay with us until the end of this video, because we're going to illuminate the darkest corners of Russian history for you. Before we begin, please don't forget to follow us. After you subscribe, you'll be the first to learn about these kinds of extraordinary historical revelations. When the file opens to 1990, we find ourselves facing a very different Russia. Boris Yeltsin was viewed as a man who had torn apart the Soviet Union and brought revolutionary reforms. But there was something that escaped notice. Behind the Kremlin's doors, an uncontrolled financial system had emerged. Money transfers that were subject to no oversight. Decisions devoid of transparency. And day after day, accountants who looked at records and tried to reconcile accounts were left increasingly astounded by the discrepancies. In the autumn of 1992, one of the Kremlin's economists drew attention to a report. This report revealed transfers being made to the personal accounts of important officials. Not millions, billions. The figures were so staggeringly large that some analysts believed it must be an error. But they were wrong. It was no mistake. It was real. Russia's national income was flowing in an uncontrolled manner into unknown accounts. By 1996, the situation had become even more critical. Officials from the International Monetary Fund began examining Russia's economic reports. The data that emerged was shocking. Between 1991 and 1996, approximately $50 billion had simply vanished from Russia's official records without a trace. This was not just a number. This meant the loss of resources that should have determined the living standards of millions of Russian people. Hospitals not being built, schools not being constructed, pensions for the elderly going unpaid. All of it was a consequence of this missing money. Researchers and journalists began tracking this money. The trails led to unexpected places. According to some findings, part of the money had reached Switzerland's secret banks. Accounting firms in Geneva had reported excessive money transfers. Who had authorized these transfers remained hidden in official records. Other trails pointed toward London's financial center. According to some sources, in the luxury offices of the Canary Wharf district, accounts originating from Russian sources had been opened. Billions of dollars had been dumped into these accounts. But the most interesting part of this story begins after that. As journalists and human rights organizations deepened their investigations, more and more names began to emerge. Top officials from the Kremlin, Yeltsin's closest advisors, and all of them had played a role in moving this money. Alexander Korsakov, the man who was Yeltsin's security guard before becoming president, had mysteriously become rich almost overnight. Pavel Borodin, the head of the presidential administration, had come to possess millions of dollars worth of assets, and the source of this wealth remained questionable. In 1997, a group of Italian researchers published a shocking finding. A secret account had been opened in Venice, and approximately $7 billion had been deposited into this account by Russian sources. The account holder was, technically speaking, one of the people Yeltsin trusted most. This report created fear in Moscow, because this was not just theft. This was an organized system at the state level. Deliberate, planned, and highly sophisticated. Official authorities tried to discredit these reports, but the documents produced were extremely clear and detailed. In the early 2000s, the Putin administration that followed Yeltsin launched some investigations. But these investigations were short-lived. According to some sources, up to a certain point, the investigations were blocked. Decisions, both written and unwritten, were made that no criminal investigations would be opened against top-level officials. What was the reason for this? Theories varied. Some claimed that part of the money had also gone to Putin's circle. Others believed that the balance of power within the Kremlin made these revelations dangerous. But the most striking part of the story was when it became clear where some of the money had gone. In 2003, a Swiss bank manager, not wanting to cause a scandal, accidentally let details slip and leaked a document related to Russian oligarchs' accounts. In this document, there were individuals whose names were explicitly written: Vladimir Putin, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, Roman Abramovich. All of them had played a role in transferring these funds to various accounts. But this was only one surface level. The real target was somewhere else entirely. Some researchers discovered that part of the money had gone to limited companies in the Cayman Islands. The Cayman Islands were among the most opaque corners of the world's financial system. Here, billions of dollars had been deposited in such a way that their source of origin remained unclear. Later, it was determined that these funds, in various forms, had returned to Russia and were used to purchase real estate, corporate shares, and luxury yachts. In 2005, in the most luxurious residential buildings in Moscow, there were apartments with anonymous owners, and questions began to be seriously raised about who the real owners actually were. Those who inherited Yeltsin's legacy followed quite an interesting path. In North London, in a tower house in Surrey, wealthy families of Russian origin were seen living luxuriously. Children attended the most expensive private schools. Wives shopped at Harrods. But the official incomes of these families were completely insufficient to explain this standard of living. The source remained mysterious. But scientific researchers continued to work persistently to unravel this mystery. In 2010, surprising data emerged in documents leaked by WikiLeaks. In reports from the U.S. ambassador, it was stated that the estimated amount of money that had been spirited out of Russia could reach as much as $500 billion. This figure was staggering, more than the entire gross domestic product of an entire nation. If this was true, then Russia's poverty throughout the 1990s had stemmed from the outflow of this money. While millions of people lived in homes they could not heat during winter months, these billions sat outside, resting in the bank vaults of the West. But the truly horrifying part emerged when it became clear that this was not unique to Russia. Other Soviet republics faced the same problem. Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Belarus, all had lost billions of dollars, and all were victims of a similar organized system. With the end of the Cold War, the political and financial elite quickly filled the void that had emerged. No accountability, no responsibility, and in the end, the people suffering through difficult times became merely a routine formality. In 1999, Yeltsin left the Kremlin with tears in his eyes. Putin took his place. But this transition period was loaded with certain questions. Why did Yeltsin leave so suddenly? Why was the Kremlin transition so quick and smooth? Some sources said it was the result of an agreement given to Yeltsin. If he left quickly, he would be guaranteed access to the highest levels of Russia for the remainder of his life, along with protection and security. Putin honored this commitment to Yeltsin, and it remained this way until Yeltsin's death. But returning to the trail of the money, the real shock lay even deeper. In 2012, before the Panama Papers, another leak occurred. In this leak, it was revealed that members of Yeltsin's family had established secret companies in Cyprus, Malta, and Liechtenstein. What was the purpose of these companies? To hide the source of the money. Because the source was the Kremlin's treasury. This was state property, but it had been transferred to private accounts. And from private accounts to other accounts. And thus, the money continued to circulate in a murky network. Today, exactly where this money is has never been officially explained. Some amounts, it is said, still sit frozen in Western banks. After the 2000s, as Russia-West relations became tense, part of these funds were frozen by the United States and Europe. So the money that had been taken out during Yeltsin's era was, at least temporarily, constrained in some way. But not all of it was found. Some accounts remained open. Others were hidden in far more secretive locations elsewhere. Looking at Russia's economic history, the 1990s will be remembered as the nation's most difficult period. But it has become clear that this hardship did not stem solely from external factors. Internal conflicts, uncontrolled plunder, And worst of all, those who carried out this plunder have never been held accountable. Between 50 and 70% of Russia's total national wealth passed into other hands during this period. And today, this money sits silently in various places around the world and used for any purpose, simply waiting as numbers in bank accounts. Yeltsin's legacy is not merely failed reforms and collapse. His legacy is unanswered questions and missing billions. His legacy is the question of why millions of people suffered through harsh winters, hunger, and poverty, while a handful of people live in villas with swimming pools abroad. In the luxury hotels of Central Europe, we can still see people who possess money of Russian origin. These people are children of the 1990s. They are heirs to the Yeltsin era, and the trails of the money lead to them. But authorities have been unable to follow these trails. Or perhaps they chose not to. This video is not merely a historical document. It is evidence of how the absence of justice and accountability creates trauma in a society. Russia has carried this trauma with it to this day. And Yeltsin's missing billions will remain a symbol of that trauma. Perhaps one day, international courts will focus intently on solving this problem. Perhaps this money will be returned to its victims. But history has taught us that this is unlikely, because power always comes before justice.